Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this edition of Leak Project. I am your host, Rex Bear, and tonight we have the skeptical psychic with us, Nancy du Tertre. Now, if you'd like to know more about Nancy, check out her website at theskepticalpsychic.com. Self-coined the skeptical psychic, Nancy advocates a new approach to psychic ability that combines intuitive imaging with rational feedback. She calls this TSP, a form of tested ESP and clairvoyance. Now, I'm going to read an excerpt from Nancy's website. It is a concept of combining our intuition with our inner voice in order to access information about ourselves and our world that would otherwise remain invisible and matched against our verifiable reality. You don't need to believe. You just need to trust. Call it suspended disbelief if you like. There is a link between our minds and the world around us which is vaster and richer than we could have ever imagined. Our human organism is a finely tuned instrument which is capable of things beyond our wildest dreams, but this kind of information must be distinguished from pure fantasy. It must be verified. Now, we will be discussing the amazing abilities each and every one of us has to unlock our own sixth sense potential. Why has our ability to think outside of the typical senses become something taboo, fringe, or oftentimes looked down upon? Is it because of the religious dogma that surrounds those that have mental abilities that others don't? Is there witchcraft involved? Does it mean getting information from demons that lurk in the shadows of the dark forces? I certainly don't think so, and I'm not here to change your mind, as we should all have the right to think for ourselves. Does the Holy Bible even say, "Judge not, lest ye be judged"? And when Jesus talks to his disciples about all the great things he has done, doesn't he tell them they will have the abilities to do all that he has done and more? So why do so many feel confined within their own minds and afraid of their true potential? Now, Nancy is a highly acclaimed author, and we will be diving into a couple of her works tonight. 1, How to Talk to an Alien. And 2, Psychic Intuition. Everything you ever wanted to ask, but were afraid to know. Hey, Nancy, it's great to have you on the show here with us, The Leak Project. How the heck are you?
I'm doing great, and I'm really happy you actually were able to pronounce my name perfectly.
Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. You know, folks, it's funny because I asked her how to pronounce the name properly before the show, and I wasn't even close. So that was a very nice thing to say, Nancy. And, you know, I really like your website and the books. I've had a chance to go through them. I haven't read them from cover to cover yet, but there's some just great information in there. And for some people, the first thing that they're going to see on a book, if it says How to Talk to an Alien, they might just immediately dismiss it. But then there's others out there that are open-minded and would like to know how to use this intuition. Now, I had a gentleman on our show a few weeks ago named Boris, and he is able to make contact with extraterrestrials, he says, via telepathically. But one of the things that kind of backs up his claims is he lives and works in the Bronx. He will go out during the day, and there's people around him. He will start filming in the skies, blue skies, and you will see these weird anomalies pop out of nowhere, change shapes and colors, and very interesting. Almost every single day he posts this on his YouTube channel, and I don't know what it is, but it's certainly they're UFOs because they're unidentified flying objects. When you started writing these kind of books and putting this information together, I mean, tell us a little bit about yourself, because this has just got to be fascinating to be considered a psychic and have these true abilities.
Well, first of all, I mean, I didn't start out that way, at least as far as I knew, because there's nobody psychic in my family, so clearly it's not genetic. We never talked about it. It was sort of, you know, it was considered so completely fringe that it was not even worth, you know, talking about or considering. So I didn't really get into it until I wanted to work on a book which I thought was going to be the psychology of intuition. And so I was, I've always been sort of on the straight and narrow path with this. And what I realized when I started researching that book on intuition, based on, I'm certified and trained in something called intuitive Gestalt psychotherapy. I've been doing that for more than 20 years or so. And so I wanted to write about that. And the psychologists, the psychiatrists, people in that industry were simply not interested in intuition. And I didn't understand why, because its intuition is extraordinary. And so I studied neuroscience after that and thought maybe those guys would know something about the brain structure as it relates to how intuition functions. And they not only did they not really have a clue at the time, but they weren't that interested. And everybody was giving intuition different names. They call it empathy, which it isn't. They would refer to as a certain type of like a memory, or a focus, or a transference, or stuff like that. And it just wasn't. So I ended up at that point. I for the first time in my life, met a lot of psychics, medical intuitives, mediums, people involved in a lot of these sort of more fringe things, because I figured, well, these guys have got something to say about true intuition, even if they can't say it in scientific words. And then I realized I had to kind of learn how to do it in order to be able to talk about it. You can't just talk about it. It's very, very, very experiential. So I trained for about 10 years with a very well-known psychic detective, and was apprenticed to her for a long time, trained in mediumship, trained in energy work. I've worked with many, many different types of healers. So I'm just trained, and what I have always said to everybody is, if I can do it, anybody can do this. And I do believe we all have the capabilities, but we shut them down. And that's really what I've spent a lot of time trying to show people, in a more sort of scientific way, how it is that we shut ourselves down, which we do. And we become blind to amazing things on this planet and in this dimension and in this lifetime. I mean, we live such extraordinary existences as human beings, and it's a shame that we don't allow ourselves to see more than we do.
Well, it's, I think, a lot because of just the psychological conditioning. Most people are told at a very young age, if they see something that it's outside of the normal parameters, oh, that's not real, that's a part of your imagination, that's your imaginary friend, etc. I wonder how many people, when they were real little, that had an imaginary friend or something, actually did see something like a spirit or something, and then that was their way to, I don't know. I mean, it's fascinating to think about that. Maybe most of the times it was imagination, but there could have been those few times. And I mean, have you always had these abilities to see outside of the box somewhat, and then it just took you that 10 years to amplify them?
No, not at all. I mean, I had a couple of clearly mediumship experiences or psychic experiences, just a few. I can count them on one hand. And I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what to do with them. They didn't make any sense. I couldn't figure them out. And so I said, well, I don't know what that is, so I won't deal with it. So, no, I mean, it's once you start to focus on these things, then you start to see. And by the way, I mean, I taught psychic development and mediumship in New York City and the tri-state area for close to 5 years. And I had a lot of students come in. Some people, I had students in there who had been like amazing mediums for 40 years already. And they just wanted to fine tune a little bit. I had other people who came in and said that they were unbelievably psychic, but that their parents had shut them down, or, people got frightened of them. Like, don't say those things, Don't predict that, someone's going to fall down a flight of stairs, because then, it's your fault if they did. So some of them were too afraid. They wanted to maybe ramp it up just a little bit, but not too much. Other people had absolutely no experience, and they wanted to feel what it was like. And so everybody starts at a different level, and you got to be okay and understand that everybody's got a different level, because I think for too long people have sort of assumed that, either you are genetically psychic or you're not. Period. End of story. So, you have to be open to the idea that you too are capable of doing any of this stuff.
Right. And I've interviewed Dick Algeier, Daz Smith, Courtney Brown several times. They're actually kind of been regulars here on the show, and they're really good at remote viewing. Are you familiar with them?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And I know that they've done some stuff that's more fringe with the Farsight Institute, certainly. But at the same time, there's been a lot of verifiable evidence to back up what they've done remote viewing on, and I think it's incredible. So when I watch them do their work, you can see they'll actually write it on the whiteboards as they're seeing this, and they talk about remote viewing as you can actually get into all the different senses. You're into remote viewing as well, aren't you?
Yeah, I'm trained in advanced remote viewing and advanced CRV. And I trained with Lynn Buchanan, and one of my mentors was Ingo Swan.
Oh, yeah. Ingo is awesome. That guy is a legend for sure. Fantastic. I read, I can't remember the name of his book, but I read it a few years ago, and some of the stuff that he was discussing in that was incredible. So how's he doing?
Well, he's on the other side, so
okay. When did he pass?
About 3 years ago.
About 3, okay. So, yeah, so certainly a pioneer and a legend, and that's great that he was able to teach you things. And the reason I brought up Daz and Courtney is because they said the same thing. You don't need, like, this DNA, this special bloodline or something to do these certain things. You just have to learn over a process and amount of time. So how do you teach people if they're wanting to get into this? What's the cornerstone or foundation you would give them so that they could start to expand these opportunities?
I am called the skeptical psychic because I am fundamentally skeptical, and I'm skeptical of everything, myself included. Truly, and I tend not to believe myself if I get too, way out there. So, and also, I mean, that's my background. I'm an attorney, so, I go by evidence. And so my little motto, which I slightly ripped off from President Reagan and the DOD, which is trust and verify. And I think that when you're in this field, it's critical. You've got to, right at the starting gate, you have to trust. You have to be wide open to whatever, crazy stuff comes into your mind or through your senses or whatever, and just say, well, okay, I'm not tossing that in the garbage yet. Just because I don't believe it or it seems fantastic or ridiculous or unbelievable, okay, I'll hang on to it. And you allow yourself to kind of explore it and get further into it, and that takes courage. And once you do that, your next step is you have to learn how to remember, because most people have an extremely poor tolerance for remembering nonsense. And that's why most people don't remember their dreams. I remember my dreams from just almost every night. And I've also been a lucid dreamer since I was a kid. But learning how to do that, there's a process. It's a mental process. And we're sort of trained out of it from very young, the way we think about things and categorize things. So once you do that, you allow yourself to be you trust, you allow yourself to accept stuff that seems abnormal to you, and takes courage, you walk through it, you learn how to remember it, and then what you do, at least what I do, okay? And, everybody has their own system for doing this, but the way that I deal with it is I'll take the stuff that I remember, and then I'll really analyze it. Like a left brain function. And I'll really think about it, and I'll interpret it, and I'll try to figure out what it means. So I'm going back and forth all the time, right brain, left brain, back and forth between this, sort of holistic, accepting, open, wide open, anything goes, into left brain, analytical, interpreting stuff and then, shutting it down a little bit. And I think a lot of, and every psychic and medium works differently, and every remote viewer works differently. Actually, remote viewing is just a system for being psychic, or the way I call remote viewing. I mean, it's clairvoyance with protocols, but it gives people who maybe would be a little nervous about just going out there and trusting anything, like all their feelings about stuff or what they're going to call their imaginary thoughts, their crazy thoughts. They don't really want to go with those. It gives them a system so they're not thinking about them and they pop up anyway. And they do that through protocols. So there are lots of different ways to do this, but I think a lot of natural psychics don't analyze to the degree that I analyze. In the same way that a lot of, say, analytical thinkers, scientists, or researchers, they don't allow themselves to explore. So it's this dual process going on all the time. That makes sense?
It does. And the protocols that you talk about, are those similar to the ones that the military used when they first started the Stargate program and the spying on people via mind?
Oh, yeah. And those are the protocols. I mean, I got trained in those military CRV protocols. So, yeah. Yeah, that's what they are.
Okay. And now, this book that you recently put together, How to Talk to an Alien, I mean, how do you talk to an alien? That's awesome. I want to talk to one.
Yeah, well,
phone home.
Yeah. You, first of all, that's a very loaded question. I mean, that's the title of my book. It took me a long time to write about that. How do you talk to an alien?
We can break this down into segments too. I mean, it's, I didn't mean to kind of ask the biggest question at the very beginning, but that's obviously incredible. I mean, that's awesome.
I think many people don't get the choice in the conversation. And my biggest, I was really surprised nobody had already sort of done a lot with this already in the field of ufology. And, maybe that's just because I'm thinking a little bit differently, from a different point of view. But if we're having this much contact and they're able to do all kinds of things in terms of abductions or cattle mutilations or turning off and on our nuclear weapons systems, the missiles in the U.S. and Russia, and doing flying over the White House or, any other or nuclear power facilities. Well, you would think maybe it might be in our interest to figure out how to communicate with them. And so I was very surprised that nobody seemed to be really talking about that. And I guess it's because either people assume that, it's okay to talk about UFOs because, well, they seem to be made out of materials like maybe metallic types of or those materials. So it's something tangible. You can hold it, you can photograph it. It's it's there. Whereas when you start talking about aliens or extraterrestrials or different types of interdimensional beings or whatever, suddenly you're getting into the realm of that. Is this my imagination? Which is the realm that I was just talking about in the psychic world. You have got to have courage to go into that nonsensical realm because what we categorize as nonsense versus stuff that makes sense is only a matter of what we have experienced prior, already in our past. And we project it onto our reality. Anyway, so talking about aliens, it seemed obvious to me we ought to be able to communicate with them. How come we're not doing this and nobody's talking about it? And in the course of doing the research that I was doing, I realized that I think in many, many cases, And particularly during contact or abductions, people are being spoken to, and they're not, for whatever reason, not having the capability to conduct a dialogue. There are dialogues that take place, but they're difficult. They're not easy. Sometimes they are not in the same languages because, by the way, the aliens in the various cases that I have taken a look at, people that I know and all that kind of thing, and recordings that I've heard and my own experience, they speak not only various types of alien languages, they speak various types of human languages, and some of them don't speak anything at all. So we have to get used to that as a concept. And we have to get smart about it. You know, which ones can we talk to? Which ones is that not going to work out? Which ones do we have to find a different mode of communication? And, oh, and by the way, how are we being communicated with? You know, it's not just through language.
Well, there's a lot of people that say that when they have communication, it's telepathically.
Right. And in fact, you have the researcher, you have David Jacobs, who's done a lot of abduction research. And his theory is basically that all communication that's being done with aliens during abduction or contact experiences is telepathic. And I know for a fact that ain't true. It's in many, many cases, many well-known cases, it's a combination. You have verbal speech, you've got telepathic communications, and you have, you know, I've the way that I have looked at this, they're basically, I would say, like 10 basic ways that they're communicating with us. So you've got one, you've got speech or sounds, audible. Two, you got telepathy. Three, electronic manipulation of sounds or images, like they can fiddle around with your computer or your TV set or your radio or anything else electronic. Four, crop circles, symbols, various types of writing. Five, dreams. Six, channeling or remote viewing. Seven, technological devices like implants, like what Dr. Roger Lear was removing from various abductees. 8, mental downloads, which are those sudden, you know, like suddenly people are just blasted with information that they can't even retain like a small piece of it. 9, UFO spacecraft responses. I don't know whether you've ever done this, but if you go outside, you know, a lot of people who are doing the protocols are going out, you know, with flashlights and music and meditation, all that, trying to call in UFOs. I've done that with a group of people where, you know, we were flashing a light. This was up in Maine, flashing a light up into the sky. It was a giant full moon that night. Absolutely beautiful, very, very clear, but dark. And at the end of 2 hours, after we'd been just flashing our big flashlight again, there was an enormous flash of white light in the sky that, by my calculation, was somewhere between about a fifth to a quarter the size of the moon. And it was far up there. So I don't know what the heck that, you know, it was doing, but it was clearly a response to what we were doing. I've never seen anything like that in my life. So that's another way they can communicate. And I know I have lots of friends who, you know, that's what they do. You know, flash 2, flash 2, flash 3, flash 3. And then the final way, the 10th way, would be just simple, you know, body language or sign language. If they don't, there is no other way to communicate.
Right. Okay.
And let me give you one other, and I sort of put this in a separate category by itself, but this is my 11th category, which is synchronicities. I have come to believe that one of the ways that they, and it's using the term communication kind of loosely, but that when synchronicity is a meaningful coincidence, so that I do believe that they can cause us to experience certain events that intersect at very important moments or meaningful, or that are intended. And I have that might sound a little esoteric, but I have lots of examples of that.
No, I know some people that say every time they get a phone call from somebody in specific, they'll look at the clock and it'll be 11:11 or 8:11 or some type of 11 shows up whenever they get a call from this person. And I've heard that by many people. So there's a lot of really neat synchronicities out there. And I think you make a good point. Oftentimes people are like, wow, that's an interesting synchronicity. I wonder why I keep having this. Well, maybe there's something behind the scenes, whether it's extraterrestrial or spiritual or the universe or divine providence or whatever, That's a pretty something to kind of just think in your head. Why am I having this synchronicity so many times?
Are you noticing that there's a sound that just started happening on your microphone?
Is it still there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Well, there might be maybe a very little background noise from like the air conditioner or something, but that's all that I can think of.
No, this just started when you started talking about the 11. So, by the way, I have the 11:11 phenomenon. It started in about May of 2006, and it's very strong.
What do you think that is?
Well, I was racking my brains trying to figure out what the heck it was. Initially I thought, because I had lived in Manhattan during 9/11, and I thought, well, okay, here we are. It's like, 5 years later, and maybe in a few months, I thought maybe it was going to be a prediction or something happening in New York during, 9/11 again. And I was very nervous about it. Nothing happened. But it kept, I kept getting the 11s. Then on 10/11, the following month, they had, it was a small airplane that was being piloted by Corey Liddell, I think, that crashed into a Midtown building. Actually, I had some friends who lived right below where it crashed. And I thought, and 11 firemen, I think, ended up in the hospital. And I thought, okay, that must be the 11s. Nope. Then I waited for 11/11, and they kept coming. They've been coming, well, where are we? We're 2006, so that's 10 years already that every time, I, for absolutely no reason, will look up at a clock, a computer, or something, my phone. It's almost always on the 11s. And what do I think it is? I don't know. I got in touch with a psychic a long time ago, and she said to me, "Do you do anything with? Do you have you had numerology done, for you?" And I said no. And she, "Do you know anything about it?" I said no. And by the way, I hadn't brought up my 11/11 thing at all. And she said, "Well, that's funny because I'm getting a very strong number associated with you." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And she said, 11/11. And I started laughing hysterically because there's no way that she ever could have known that. And at that time, it really wasn't very well known as a phenomenon. And then I started to wonder, and I actually wrote about this in my book, Psychic Intuition. And I said, is this a couple possibilities. Either this is spirit giving a confirmation through this very powerful number, at least in the field of numerology, as being sort of the perfect sort of universal number. And maybe the fact that I'm working in this direction, which was quite a change from being an attorney and running businesses, maybe this is like a confirmation on my pathway. That's one idea. So it's a spirit to self or a self to self conversation. The other possibility that I thought about was, well, maybe this is some kind of, what I discovered was that there are a lot of autistic savants out there that, I don't know if you remember, but there was a long time ago, the original TV judge, his name was Judge Wapner.
Oh, yeah.
So in the movie Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman, where he plays this savant,
Mm-hmm.
and he's always shuffling around and he's anxious. And he's always saying to Tom Cruise, who played his brother in the thing, 10 minutes to Wapner, 10 minutes to Wapner. And he always knew exactly when it was. He didn't need a clock. He didn't need anything. Well, it turns out there are a lot of savants out there who can do that. They can measure time down to the second, and they can do it in their sleep. And I don't know if you ever had that experience where you tell yourself the night before what time you want to wake up the next day, and then you wake up at exactly that time.
Mm-hmm.
Do you do?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, well, so then it occurred to me, okay, so maybe this is like somehow it's like a sensing of some natural rhythm that we have, that's almost like what autistic savants do. And I learned not only can they measure time, they can measure space. And there are people who can do it to the millimeter. It's crazy. So maybe we're all just kind of programmed in different ways to be sensitive to frequencies. And it may be a sensitivity. That may be what that 1111 time prompt thing is all about.
It's funny that you bring up synchronicities because you've mentioned two people or two references towards people that I've interviewed recently, just the past few weeks. Dr. David Jacobs, we had him on here about a week ago. And then we had Dr. Daryl Treffer, which was actually the guy that did the majority of the work with savants and stuff in the actual movie Rain Man. He was kind of one of the guys that said, okay, well, the character needs to act like this because he's a specialist.
Right, exactly. And it's funny because I quoted both of them in my book.
Wow. Well, once again, folks, hey, there, those who are listening to this show, these synchronicities have reached a neat point again. And there's a reason I think that people meet at certain times to get information out there. I mean, that's one of the reasons the Leak Project was started, is because there's just so much information out there. I think it's nice to get people like yourself on the show to hear about your experiences and your knowledge. So, with these books you've put together also, have you made contact with an extraterrestrial before?
Let me put it this way. Yes, but I don't think, not in the sense of, was I don't believe I've ever been abducted. I don't believe I've ever had a face-to-face contact with a full-blown extraterrestrial. What I have had are some kind of bizarre experiences. And I would say the main one, was on June 19th, 2011. Okay, so 5 years ago, basically. I was at a local movie theater here in New Jersey, and 5 minutes from my house. And I was there with my daughter. We go to see Woody Allen's Midnight in Paris. And it turns out when we leave the movie theater, which was 11:45 p.m., it turns out we're the only people in the entire movie theater. Nobody else was there, which was weird. I mean, I don't even remember seeing anybody working there. It was just empty. And we go out into the parking lot. We're heading towards the car, and it's in sort of a mall. So it's a big, flat parking lot area. There are no cars, nobody. It's next to a highway. And my daughter points up in the sky, and she said, "What's that?" And I look up, and I see about 20 to 30 orange lights. And I had no clue. I don't know about you, but I don't normally see orange lights in the sky. I don't think I ever had before. And they were about 500 to 1,000 feet up. They were about a half a mile away. And I'm very good, speaking of being good with measuring time, I'm also pretty good with measuring space. And I thought, well, is somebody beaming something up there that's bouncing off of some clouds? But nobody was beaming anything. There weren't beams of light coming from any direction. And it was not a cloudy night. There was very, very, very high cloud cover, but not low cloud cover. And it was pitch black out of it, and we're staring at this thing. And eventually I could see that it was in the shape, there was a craft, it was the shape of a boomerang, and it was the size of a football field. And my daughter was really panicked. She said, "Come on, let's go. And I said, "No, I have to see what this thing does." I had no clue what this was. And I was not interested in UFOs. I was not interested in ufology, certainly not interested in aliens. In fact, I even wrote in my book, Psychic Intuition, I said, I've been through enough things now. I have seen, heard, smelled, and felt ghosts, with my physical senses. So I'm okay with accepting that.
What do they smell like?
Well, the one ghost, well, they can smell like many things. They can smell like the most common things would be, smoke, like cigarette or cigar or tobacco, or various types of perfumes or flowers. The one that I smelled, along with about 6 other women, was actually during we were doing a psychic detective work, and we had been handed a piece of paper. We weren't allowed to see what was on it, and we were supposed to try and figure out, well, what's this case about? And immediately, the entire room, as far as I was concerned, started to stink really bad. And it wasn't manure. I thought maybe it was the kitties that my teacher had in her house, but they never did anything. Plus, it was very sweet smelling. It was a summer night outside. And there was nothing. But it was stinking really badly. And I mentioned it to some of the other women, and they said, yeah, whatever that is, it's bad. And I realized it was the smell of like what, when you have like a squirrel or something that gets stuck in the walls and it dies, and then in your room it smells like death. Well, that's what this smelled like. And I thought it was bizarre. And I had actually had, I think, an entire conversation with somebody like that day or the day before about, I was wondering what a psychic smell would smell like. Like, how would you know the difference between a real smell and a psychic smell? And what I realized, because all of these women smelled it, but they smelled it, they thought it was coming from different directions, but we all knew that it was expanding. And my teacher had been in another room. She smelled it in there, which would have been impossible. And it wasn't coming from the floors, it wasn't coming from the ceilings or the walls, it was in the center of the room. So the difference between a real smell and a psychic smell is the way that it moves. It expands and then dissipates in a way that a real smell doesn't. Even though when you're smelling it, it smells exactly just identical to a real smell. Turns out, long story short, the case, once we looked at this piece of paper, the case we were working on was a case of a local college kid who had gone missing. And we found out 2 weeks later, I think, that his body had showed up in a Pennsylvania landfill. His body had been thrown into a dumpster and then ended up there. So it was quite clear that that was his clue to us, was his essence translating into a certain smell.
That's pretty frightening and also incredible at the same time. Now, you also work with certain law enforcement agencies and individuals to help find missing people and such too, don't you?
Yeah.
What's that like?
I love doing it because for me, I feel like I'm doing something useful and helpful to people. And particularly, for grieving family members, trying to give them information or give the police or the law enforcement, the detectives, whoever is doing it, giving them information that maybe they wouldn't have thought about or gotten through some type of normal, means of investigation, to kind of reroute them a little bit. It's I don't know. I really like it. There are a lot of psychics who can't stand it because when you're psychically connecting in that way, it's you're getting into very often some sort of gruesome type of scenarios, and when you're that sensitive, you're exposed in a certain way. So it doesn't, unless you're a person who, like, I would never describe myself as an empath. I have lots of friends who are empaths. You know, they walk into a room, and if, you know, somebody's got a bad headache in there, they're going to get the same headache. And, or if somebody's feeling like, you know, something tragic and they're so sad and whatever, they're going to feel tragic and sad also, and they're going to get their own feelings mixed up with the feelings of somebody else. I tend to be able to compartmentalize, and I think it's because I have so much left brain function. So I can analyze stuff. So for me, I can look at it more like a puzzle. For other people, they just get lost in the feelings and the sensations, so they don't like it. And when you're wandering around at a homicide scene psychically, it can be really unpleasant. But I like it just because I feel useful.
How often, if you were to look at the percentages, have you ever kept track of the amount of hits you get?
No, I don't. I get it. I don't know that I've ever solved a case, and the way that I say this is that I believe it's it's law enforcement that solves the cases, because they're the ones who are doing the footwork and the actual investigations, and they figure the stuff out. They put the pieces together. And the way that I view what I do is I'm just there to I'm like any other tool, so to speak, and I'm just adding a different piece of information to the total puzzle. But I get amazed. I amaze myself. I think, anytime something is like dead on hit, I just go, oh my goodness, I wonder how I got that. So when you get, the exact locations of, bodies, or the exact names of complex names of victims or suspects or things like that, or you can describe them, you just go, holy cow. It's amazing to me because, in my world, in my former world, that stuff should not work. There's no way you should be able to do that. It's just really cool.
Well, and then you said you've been 10 years studying and basically doing different practices and stuff like that. You went through the protocols, but let me ask you this, like when you actually, if you were to say, okay, here's one exercise that you can take to get to the point of being able to start communicating and doing things outside of the typical five senses, what would you say those one or two steps would be absolute crucial to make it happen?
To become psychic in that sense, well, first of all, you got to realize that we are every second of every day, so 24/7, we are being bombarded every second with, I believe it's 11 million bits of sensory data. We are only consciously aware of between 16 to 40. Okay, so what happened to the other 10 million, 990, you get my point. That information is reaching us, that sensory information every second is reaching us, but we're not conscious of it. So the whole idea is to sensitize yourself to every little nuance of what could be a piece of sensory information about your environment. Because, as human beings, our five senses, we rely on them the most because they are the most critical to the survival of our individual biological entity, which is us. So we need them, we pay attention to them. We kind of disregard and throw away everything else, but all of those we live in a vibrational world, and if you sensitize yourself sufficiently, you can start picking up vibrations that are coming from, the other side of the planet, the universe, whatever, because vibrations travel, and you can feel them. instead of saying, well, I had this weird thought and nah, it's too weird, go with it, because it may have been a way for your brain to, because it didn't have a sensory organ that was refined enough to pick up that level of a vibration, it picked it up generally through your body, and that information through electrical impulses or whatever would have traveled to your brain, and then your brain's got to figure out, well, let's see, if it didn't come through my eyes or my ears or whatever, how do I explain to myself what this looks like or what this might be? What was that? I mean, we know that color doesn't exist out there. We make it up. We manufacture it. Okay? Same thing goes for information that's traveling from far corners of the universe. Our brain has to figure out a way to translate it for us. So I believe that it translates it into a kind of a language that we understand, and that's the language of our eyes, ears, skin, nose, mouth, even though it didn't come in through any one of those organs. So if you want to really get good at being psychic, I believe you have to sensitize yourself. And the way you sensitize yourself is you realize that all those weird little things that you used to think were thoughts, that were little crazy fantasy thoughts, in all likelihood, they are it's information about the world around us. It's sensory information. It's not little private fantasy thoughts.
Have you ever accidentally tapped into somebody's mind and been able to kind of read what they were thinking or hear what they were thinking?
I'm sure I have. Yeah. Yeah. And that's the whole idea. I mean, people are deathly afraid of the fact that, you might be able to read their mind. And all of our thoughts are out there. All the information is out there. My mother she's a very nice person. Everything is polite with my mother. I mean, politeness is top priority with her. But she's also extremely judgmental. And I used to say to her, because she would think that if she was just polite to somebody, they'd never know what she really thought about them. I said, Mom, it's completely obvious. I mean, your judgmentalness is out there. So you can't hide. There is no place for people to hide. And a lot of people get frightened by that as an idea. But it's true. And if you're psychic, you know.
Right. Right, because it kind of, everything, like you said, even thoughts are an energy frequency, and you project that frequency. So, that's why there's a lot of speculation now with certain technologies. Pretty soon, maybe, they're going to sell headsets that you can put on and literally, okay, well, that person's thinking this because it picks up on that vibration and it breaks it down because of the software or whatever. So, it's interesting. Now, like, as far as I'm going to jump back to TSP. You say, what is TSP? And it basically explains how it's proving certain points with ESP in conjunction. Could you describe some of the ways that you say this proves it to be without a shadow of a doubt accurate?
Okay. There's always, and even in the field of remote viewing, I think one of the biggest stumbling points was always how do you. It was the judging process. How do you decide whether or not the stuff that somebody said was accurate in referring to a very, very specific event? And sometimes the information you get is vague, or scattered, or it's mismatched in terms of time and space, or whatever. So you have to assemble it the right way, and you have to be I think you have to be liberal in terms of being a judge. One of the things I always appreciated about my psychic detective teacher, Nancy Owen Weber, was that she never dismissed anything that we said. And at first I thought, well, yeah, that's really sloppy. Come on, you got to be, let's be really rigorous here. What are you doing? And then I realized there's a point to that. because when you in allowing yourself to experience these funky, nonsensical, out of the ordinary types of thoughts, which I'm going to call psychic, give yourself permission. And my biggest stumbling block was always I really didn't want to make a fool out of myself. I didn't want to look like an idiot because I like to research everything, but you got to get it out there, and then once it's out there, you don't want to face ridicule or judgment. And what I always appreciated about what she did was that she would be very accepting of what we said. I'll give you an example. There was, we were working on a case once. We had no information. We were handed a blank piece of paper, or no, it was a piece of paper with something written on it, but we didn't know what it was. And so after we all got our psychic impressions, she goes around in our group and one by one says, okay, what did you get? What did you get? What did you get? And everybody got something totally different. One person got, there's this great, I'm down. It feels like I'm in Florida. The sun is hot. I'm seeing some trees, or the ocean, whatever. Somebody else gets a big eyeball. Okay. Somebody else, what I got was that there was a light layer of snow in what I call a young wooded area. Okay. And I saw at a certain point underneath, what else? Oh, I'd seen a blue scarf, I think. I'd seen an eyeball also, coincidentally, or not. And some blood in the snow. Turns out, long story short, that when she opened up what was on this piece of paper, it was the word young, and I'd used the word young many, many, many times in my description. I had no idea that it was actually the name of the presumed suspect in this case. I'd said, well, the scarf belonged to a young girl. It was in a young forest with young trees, young, young, young. So I hadn't made that logical connection. So a lot of times when you're doing work or you're judging, you're not the person who is meant to judge. It's the recipient. And people, skeptics will accuse, those situations, oh, well, you're retrofitting it to accommodate whatever the psychic saw. No, not really. Because if they're hitting on particular points and you interpret them a certain way, then that interpretation is accurate. You have judged it to be correct. Now, what my teacher did in that instance was she found a way to say, well, the Florida thing, that may have been where the suspect traveled just prior to committing this homicide. And, oh, by the way, yes, it was a homicide. And yes, the guy was the body was in a light layer of snow in a lightly wooded area, the way I described. She didn't know what the scarf was. They hadn't found a scarf. Okay. And I'd seen this young girl, somehow involved. She thought, well, maybe that's the suspect's daughter. Well, I thought that was stretching it because why would the suspect's daughter be involved? But the way she pulled it in, it made sense as part of the scenario. It's like when I was in law school, there was one of my favorite professors was my contracts professor, and he used to hold up an imaginary orange in his hand. And he'd say, when you're doing contract law, you have to look at the orange from every single possible angle. And it's if you get 10 psychics in the same room, they're looking at the same psychic event, but you'll get 10 different pieces of information because they're looking at the orange from a different vantage point. So they have different information. So you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. I've heard that before too with people when they'll remote view something, somebody will see something completely different because they're looking at a different angle basically.
Right. Right, exactly. So that's why you have to be, I'm saying the judging part is really tricky.
Okay. Now, you've also kind of, when you go, there's a new website I think that you've recently put together, and it's called talkalien.com, and that's, you've got access to your book there, How to Talk to an Alien. What are some, other options for people to really kind of dive into the possibilities of making contact? I know the lights thing, that sounds pretty cool, especially if you live in the high desert or something like that, maybe in the Four Corners area there, or out there in Dulce, New Mexico. Have you ever thought about going out to Dulce and trying to make contact with something out there? That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, I was in Santa Fe recently with a good friend of mine, and they were driving back up through that area in order to get home, and I was going the other direction. And I have about zero desire to go there. I mean, truly zero. And
You want to get abducted by reptilians?
my friend who went through there, no, and let me tell you something. Okay, so ways that there's contact with different types of communication. All right, I had a lucid dream, and I have talked about this before with people. It was, and when you have a lucid dream, it feels different. You just know somehow it has a level of what feels like a reality to it that other dreams don't, and very often they're verifiable. My grandfather once came to me and told me basically to go get my eyes checked, and I had, for the first time in my life, symptomless glaucoma. He's probably saved my eyesight. And he came to me in a dream that was lucid. Anyway, that's one example. But anyway, so I'm in this lucid dream. I'm driving my car about 5 blocks from here, and I'm waiting for a friend of mine. I was like going to pick my friend up, and my neighbor. And I'm waiting in my car. I'm in the driver's seat, and the door opens on the passenger side, and she doesn't get in. A reptilian gets in. And I look at him, and he looks at me, and I'm thinking, oh, no. And in the time I'm thinking, well, what I really ought to be doing is making a run for it, jumping out my side of the door, I realize that our gaze is mutually interlocked. He's looking at me, and I'm looking at him, and it's locked. And then I realize that he's been able to lock into my brainwaves, and I can feel it. And it feels like somebody put like a clamp, like a wood clamp, on your brain and then squeezed it. And then I'm thinking, well, it's not good. I'm doomed. Whatever this is, it's not good. And then I started thinking, well, you know what? I'm a trained psychic. What was the point of doing all this if I can't figure out what to do in a situation like this? And so what I did is I sent what I describe as like a plasma ball of energy through our interlocked brain waves, which felt in some sense almost like a connecting wire, and blasted him. And I broke that connection, and I woke up. I think that was some form of contact, even though that might sound peculiar. And by the way, I didn't finish my story about seeing that big UFO. After that, my daughter and I began to receive phone calls, phone call interruptions, and mechanical, cold-sounding voices. You couldn't quite make out what they were saying, mostly male. We could both hear it, but we couldn't hear each other. Once, one of them said my daughter's name, and then whenever they were done with their weird vibrational speaking, they were clearly trying to speak, it would hang up both of us. And then neither one of us could call each other back for 5 or 10 minutes because the phones would just ring and ring and ring. That started to happen with her, with some of her other friends, and me with some of my other friends. So I believe that was connected. On a different occasion, and I don't know whether I'm, want to bore you with a whole long story, but...
No, this is great.
Okay. My daughter and most of these experiences seem to happen with me and my daughter. I don't know what that's about, but it is what it is. And at this particular point, I was driving my daughter to look at colleges out in Pittsburgh, and I took my son, who was very young at the time, and I'm driving, and it's about an 8-hour drive, 7 or 8 hours, very boring. And I got into the Allegheny foothills, which is about 2 hours outside of Pittsburgh. Kids are asleep, and I'm really bored, and I'm thinking, and it's sort of dusk, and I'm thinking, if UFOs exist, now's a great time for you guys to show up. That'd be entertaining. And they don't show up. We finally get into Pittsburgh. We get into our hotel room. The kids watch the Curious Life of Benjamin Button, which in retrospect I thought was very interesting because that is also like Midnight in Paris. It's a movie about time going backwards. And I go to sleep. Middle of the night, my daughter, who's sometimes a sleep talker, but she's never said anything, she sort of says one syllable, and she all of a sudden sits bolt upright. Her eyes flip open, and she's looking straight ahead, and she says, I mean, forget about the grace. I don't know what you humans mean by grace anyway. And she falls back down, and she's sound asleep. And my heart's pounding. I jump out of bed. I find a hotel pad of paper. I write down exactly what she said. And then the next day I get up and I say, what does the word grace mean to you? And she said, oh, you mean like grace, saying grace at Thanksgiving? And I said, yeah. Anything else? And she said, oh, you mean like a ballerina has grace? Yeah. Anything else? She couldn't really think of anything else. And I said, okay. I said, by the way, did you have any strange dreams last night? And she said, oh, yeah, I had the weirdest dream. I dreamt space aliens came and they got me. And they said, you have to come with us on our spaceship. And they took me off into some other galaxy. And I was having a great time. And then they said, well, now we got to take you back. And I didn't want to go. So they brought me back. And I said, do you remember what the spaceship looked like? And she described it. And I said, well, that's interesting because I dreamt about the same spaceship last night, only I was watching it fly away.
Well, that's pretty powerful testimony right there. So what was this spaceship looking like?
It was a disc shape. It was a sort of a bubble top. It was silvery. There were some other details on it that I don't recall. But it was fairly specific. And she and I had never discussed UFOs before. We'd never discussed aliens. I kept all of my work, and at that point I wasn't interested in them anyway. So, I thought that it had to do with something else. I thought it had to do with what I had been doing the entire previous day, which of course I did not tell either one of my kids, which is I had been speaking with a demonologist because I had interviewed the top exorcist at the Vatican who had told me that he worked with certain types of psychics called charismatics. And I was trying to figure out what the heck is a charismatic and what the heck is the Catholic Church doing working with psychics. I thought they weren't allowed to do that. And it turned out a charismatic is somebody who has charisms. Well, what's a charism? It was incredibly complicated. So this demonologist was sending me all this Vatican literature, and I'm reading through it finally at the very end, and I realized charisms are things like prophecies, laying on of hands, speaking in tongues, things like that. In other words, and the simple definition was a grace. Okay, so you go back to what my daughter in the middle of the night is saying. I mean, forget about the grace. I don't know what you humans mean by grace anyway. So at that point, I'm thinking, oh no, the devil has gotten into my daughter and he's using her vocal cords to talk about, forget about the grace. And I'm thinking, that's very creepy. But then people said to me years later, well, how do you know that it wasn't grays? Which you mean?
That's what I thought you said at first was grays.
I mean, forget about the grays. I don't know what you humans mean by grays anyway. I mean, what kid speaks like that? You humans?
Right. That's exactly what I thought, though, when you said that at first was grays. I didn't know you said grace.
Yeah, well, and there's one of those weird overlaps. And now that I'm in this field, I find it more and more all the time, which is, boiling down to that question, which is good and evil, demons and angels, aliens and aliens. And I think that that's a subtlety that as human beings, we've got to, or an ambiguity that we've all got to get comfortable with, even though we like to make things black and white.
I've read the Bible many times, and I'm not a religious person. I'm definitely a seeker of the truth and knowledge, and I'm trying to find out what's really going on, and that's, one of the reasons the Leak Project was created. But when you look at some of the scriptures, it talks about like the book of Enoch, the fallen angels, the Nephilim, the Watchers, and the way it describes to me is I think of them, if let's say you had never heard of religion or weren't grown up with any type of religious or dogmatic background, and you were to read that, but you knew about science and technology and just everything else, I think that most people would probably look at that as some type of ET, somebody coming from somewhere else with advanced technology. And these fallen angels, I often wonder, were maybe these people that just didn't agree with the mainstream, and they were shunned down from the heavens and looked at as these horrible people and these fallen angels. Well, maybe in reality they were just people like you and I. They just didn't agree with the norm. I don't know. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that the more that I understand about UFOs, aliens, alien technology, disinformation, and all of those different angles, the more I can appreciate that we have really, in almost all likelihood, been visited multiple times, many, many times throughout our history. I just read something really interesting the other day. I was reading about Japanese parahistories, which are the sort of the equivalent of, the Book of Enoch, but in Japan. Where they have they call them the kami, which were the sort of the polytheistic version of gods that ran the universe, and some of them sort of assumed these sort of human forms. Some of them became the ancestors of the emperors later, and that kind of thing. But they would keep these histories in these ancient texts in the temples. And at some time, sort of in the early unwritten part of Japanese history, there was a big influx of immigrants. I think it must have been around the year 600 AD, if I'm right. I could be wrong about that. But a lot of them were, Chinese immigrants that came over. But then there was a group that came over that were quite different, and they were Hebrew. They were Jewish in origin, and incorporated into these Japanese mythologies or religious stories, whatever you want to call them, names of particular kami, and I've forgotten the name of them. Turns out if you trace the name of that god or that kami, it gets traced back to the identical name of whatever that big shrine is in Mecca that everybody is always walking in a certain direction around.
Wow.
And the name means giant, something like a giant shining light.
Okay.
If you think about that, you could easily say that could have been something like a landed UFO thousands of years ago. That people are still venerating this, they're still drawn to that location, to that whatever that presence. And it's been carried on, at least in terms of Japanese religious history and the Shinto religion, as being some type of a god. And so I think, the Watchers, the Nephilim, and all of the, those sort of godlike characters could potentially have been easily, I think, alien travelers, visitors.
There's a lot of possibilities out there, and that doesn't even touch on the Anunnaki and some of the Sitchin theories, as well as other people that are out there that have talked about these gods that came down and lived for thousands and thousands of years. And then you've got the Avatar theory about many of the ancient deities and god forms or gods were actually reincarnations of these Anunnaki. So, And then you can get into a whole bunch of other theories with that as well, with the holographic universe and quantum entanglement, quantum physics, etc. And obviously with what you do, tapping into the Akashic records, and that is just the universal recording of everything, basically, whether it's a flash or a vision you have, or you're getting yourself in tune where you're getting to the vibrational frequency where you're clearing the mind and going to the next level. These lucid dreams that you have too, I think are pretty cool. Have you been able to actually have out-of-body experiences as well?
A good friend of mine was just asking me that the other day. And I have lots and lots of friends who have out-of-body experiences. As far as I know, I don't think I've had any. But then maybe I have a different definition of what I think it's supposed to be. I do know that this friend who I was talking to about this, she says, when we first met, and we didn't know each other, we'd only, I think, met once for a lunch with some other people. And when I had some surgery, I was under anesthesia. She said I showed up in her room and was complaining about, printing something, and was, saying stuff in French. Now, I speak French fluently, so that would make sense. My husband's French. And I was, the day before I went into surgery, had to sign a publishing contract. And so I knew that I was going to have to write my book extremely quickly. So I was nervous about that. She didn't know anything of that about me. I said, are you sure? I mean, and she's a very psychic person. She said, yes, you were here in my bedroom. And, I saw you clear as day. She said, you weren't talking to me, but you were talking. She said that her husband heard me also. And she said that I have done it again. Now, she's clear across the country. So, if I'm traveling around, I don't know it. People have said, well, if you fly in your dreams, then you're out of body. Well, I fly like almost every night. So, I mean, flying for me, and I, lots of people fly in their dreams. I remember asking Ingo about that a long time ago. And, cause I said, I'm flying around, and in my dreams, I can go through walls of buildings. I remember flying around over New York City once. That was when I was talking to him about it. And he was sort of, vague and ambiguous about what it was, but I think he thought that was probably out of body. I don't know. I have no idea.
Okay. And, let's go back to your website, Alien Writing Samples here. I'm at talkalien.com. And some of this stuff, do you speak Klingon or Vulcan?
No, but funny you should ask that, because I'm about to talk about that. I'm doing a presentation for a branch of MUFON next week, actually, in Philadelphia. And I am going to be talking about the Klingon language. But no, I don't speak it personally. Do you?
No. Not in this form anyway. Maybe when I shapeshift. But, here's one thing that's, if I was going to shapeshift, though, it would definitely be Vulcan. I think that they're, a lot cooler. But or the Q. The Q were definitely probably my favorite. But, one of the things, I'm looking at this stuff you've got here, and are these all basically via automatic writing, or all these samples on your website?
Yeah, the stuff that I have up on the website are people, yeah, I guess I would call it automatic writing. Yeah, pretty much. Some people feel absolutely compelled to write this stuff. It's like they have to grab a piece of paper immediately. It's like a download, and they just start doing it. There's a sample there by a guy named Eric Hope, who is a friend of mine. And when I first started to talk to him about it, he started, most of these people only started writing like this after they had some form of abduction. And usually they have some memory of something so they can put it together. But he was able to write it at will, and I said, well, and that's why he was so interesting. I said, well, you think you can translate stuff? If I gave you, I say something, can you immediately translate it into that writing? He said, yeah, I think I can do that. And he would do it. Now, the problem with a lot of these people who are doing automatic writing is that they can't they can't tell you, character for character, or letter for letter, word for word, or even sentence for sentence, what what it corresponds to, because they don't know. Most people just don't know, which is kind of interesting to me. So that's been part of the mystery that I've been researching, trying to unravel.
Is there like some type of software combined with a really high-end computer, I wonder, that could possibly find out what these things mean? That'd be pretty cool, because maybe there's some important information there that might need to be relayed on to other people.
Well, exactly. And that's what I have been working on, is trying to, because I know what I would like to do in terms of computer software. It just doesn't exist. And I don't have the funding to be able to put that together myself. But yeah, I mean, that's the goal. What I have also, in my, what would you call it? It's an analytical framework for trying to analyze alien writing in particular, but also speech. But writing is a little bit easier because it's visual. Is what I'm saying is, don't disregard the people who are channeling or having dreams or having, whatever these kind of strange revelations are. Don't throw them out and say, well, they're just nuts, and add them back into the equation. Take anything if you've got writing from an actual artifact or a letter, a real one, like an alien letter, and I have them. I have them in my book, How to Talk to an Alien. You take those, you match them up with memories of, usually people who have been abducted, who can remember little snippets here and there. They remember seeing maybe certain writing on a doorway or on a piece of, some artifact that they're looking at, but they don't have it anymore. So you compare it to the memories, the artifacts, the memories, and then compare it to the channeled writing or the automatic writing. And once you start to do that, you start to see that there are tremendous similarities across the board. And one thing that it kind of bothered me a lot was a lot of these contactees who I spoke with would say, well, yeah, I'm in touch with, whatever the name of the alien race is, and there are like so many different names of alien races, I can't keep track of them all. And they say, but the aliens are telling me that I'm special, I'm the one, and I'm the basically the Earth's ambassador. I'm the only one they're going to talk to. Well, that's great, except I heard that from almost everybody, which made the whole thing a little bit suspect to me. And then I started to realize there's a way to gauge whether that's accurate or not. I mean, it could be that we're dealing with so many different species of aliens that that's possible, okay? The other possibility is that maybe these people are being pulled around by the nose a little bit, being so that they perform properly, to transmit information properly. But it could be that their language is identical to somebody else's language, which is what I'm finding.
That's another thing, too, is you've got that 100 monkey syndrome, where even if somebody isn't seeing it physically, like, once again, everything that you think is out there somewhere, something else might be tapping into that, someone else might be picking up on it, so then they're writing the same thing. Now, how much disinformation do you think is out there on the ET phenomenon? I mean, what is your take? Let me step back here for a second, Nancy. What is your take on the reptilian theory of an ancient race that came down or has been here all along and basically controls the politicians at the top levels and the elitists, or maybe they're even tied in with these bloodlines, and some of them are shapeshifters that David Icke came up with that main theory many years ago, or he was a big part of it, I would say. What is your thought about that?
I try not to have any thoughts about that, because I don't like that thought. It is, given, how extended I view the possibilities in this universe, to me, it's a possibility. Given the fact I had that dream, it's a possibility. I've spoken with contactees who say the reptilians are just lovely, and I actually, at one of my presentations, I had played a clip that a contactee had made of her trying to do the reptilian language after she was dreaming about reptilians and then had been asking them to speak their language. And they said, well, it's too complicated. You'll never be able to do it. She said, please, please, please. And then one of them apparently said, okay. And when she woke up, she turned on her the recorder on her phone and started doing this weird language of kind of like guttural clicking, kind of like that.
Wow. That reminds me of The Fifth Element when those things came out. You remember that movie?
No, I didn't see it.
They sounded just like that when they talked in their native tongue, and they were these big, like, reptilian ogre-looking things that probably weighed about 400 pounds and had really cool laser technology.
Well, there you go.
That was really cool. Wow. That was almost. I'm sure you're. No wonder you're good at different languages, Nancy.
Well, I do. I speak French. I speak a little German, a little Thai. So, and I can recognize a lot of languages. And I can recognize, the really cool thing I learned is that aliens speak in accents. They have accents. And once you learn what their accents are, you can figure out a lot about where they're from, how long they've been here, and who they're dealing with. There was one of them, and just real quick, was it was called the W-56 Friendship Case, came out of Italy in the 1950s, and it was contact between a little town in northern Italy and an entire collective of aliens, all different types of aliens. And they lived apparently in this 200-mile-long underground base beneath the Adriatic Sea. And these aliens were communicating eventually with top-level politicians, industrialists, scientists, not just the local townspeople. But anyway, there was one of them who this alien spoke with this he spoke English, but with this really weird accent. And turns out that he had learned how to speak English from listening to old tapes of Mussolini speaking. Or not English, it wasn't English, it was Italian. He was speaking Italian, but with a Mussolini accent. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. And I imagined that it would be like, if we're listening in English to like an old movie, say from the 30s or the 40s, and they're talking like this, and they say things in a totally different way, and it's a little bit sharp, a little bit nasal. And I imagine that that's how that alien was speaking Italian, because he didn't know any better, And that gives a big clue as to how long he had been interacting with humans and where.
That makes me think also, we were talking about Dr. Jacobs. He says that the majority of the people that he hypnotizes and does regression sessions with that have said they've been abducted, it's a part of some hybridization program where they're trying to bring people in clandestinely that have part DNA for them, etc. And they're showing these ETs basically what it's like to live a regular life. Okay, so if you're walking down the street and there's a red light, you make sure to stop there so you don't get hit by a car, stuff like that. And what you just said makes me think, maybe there could be a part of that could be true. Now, I don't think that everybody that's been abducted, though, was abducted just so they could teach somebody how to go to the bathroom or open up a refrigerator.
Yeah, I've heard all of that before also. And, maybe there's some truth to that, but my sense is more, us being educated than them being educated.
You don't feel that they are, or not they, do you think that there's some specific factions here now, though, that have some very powerful influence that do not have our best intentions at heart?
In a really generic way, and I have read all the stuff about the meetings, the exchanges, and I've talked to plenty of people. I also know an awful lot of people, and somewhere, and this might be wrong. Okay, it's just my opinion, but I think I would have bumped into somebody by now. I do think that they're here. I do think that there are plenty of hybrids around. Um, I do think that there are large scale battles of interest, which we as tiny human beings might call good and evil. Um, the battles of interest for, this planet, our species, the survival of different species on this planet, all kinds of things. Because I think that they're here for a number of different reasons, and I just don't think that we're necessarily privy, at least, the average Joe on the street, to be able to judge whether what the end game is and whether it's good or bad. If we're going to get eaten or killed, that's bad in my view. I mean, any way you cut that, I think that's not a good thing. But if the end game is, let's say, to eliminate a certain amount of the populations so that planet Earth and human beings survive for sustainability, is that evil? Yeah, it's evil on one hand and not evil on the other. Are they controlling us so that they have control over our global policies? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I have no clue, because I can tell you that our world it's in a very bad spiral, and we don't seem to have the stamina or the guts or the courage as a race to be able to resolve it until we're forced to. So maybe it's a good thing. I just think it's way more ambiguous than, is it good or is it bad?
Sure, absolutely. And as far as your definition of the other side, we talked about Ingo Swann earlier. He said, well, I don't know, he's on the other side. And what is that to you?
What's the other side?
Mm-hmm.
I started out, I got raised Protestant, and I always wanted to believe in God, and I always wanted to believe that there was something, after death. And I really tried hard, but it wasn't working for me, at least not on a real fundamental level, until I got into an understanding of the paranormal. Now that I have begun to understand the paranormal, I absolutely believe in God, and I absolutely believe in some form of cohesive existence after death. And I guess when as I said, I've experienced the spirits of deceased people with all of my senses. I've experienced them through a form of, I guess you would call it telepathy also. I've gotten information that I've been able to verify. It allows me to understand that there are overlays of existence, and that I don't believe that we disappear. I think that's always been my greatest fear, but I don't believe it anymore. I think that we continue on in some cohesive pattern.
It's very difficult to stop energy. I haven't heard of any information whatsoever that says energy dies. I mean, some form or another has to continue to flow, and the cycle should continue to go on. And that's a pretty cool approach. I certainly appreciate, Nancy, your real balanced presentation that you've given us here at the Leak Project. And for those that have had an opportunity to listen to this show, I'd highly recommend checking out the skepticalpsychic.com. Also, if you're interested in some of these alien writings, go to talkalien.com. And one question I was hoping to ask before we close out tonight, Nancy, was if you can communicate with ETs, and if you've seen spirits and had multiple sensory perceptions when you've been in connection with ghosts, how would one make contact with past loved one?
You send out the telepathic message. You send it out. You send out the intention. Intention is key to doing all of this kind of work. With any type of psychic, clairvoyant, mediumship, any of that. And then you have to ask for certain type to receive the answer in a format that you're going to understand and get. Because if you're not really comfortable being, a clairvoyant or telepathic person, you might miss the response. So ask for it in a particular format. Like ask them to show up in a dream, or a lot of people do stuff with they'll ask them to manifest in terms of pennies showing up, or birds or butterflies or feathers or things like that are tangible, because a lot of people need something tangible. Ask for it. And most people I think you can connect with, and then you also have to be patient. You got to wait. I think that spirit energy takes a lot of power behind it, a lot of energy in order to travel, let alone manifest or answer. So give them time. And I do think that you get answers.
Cool. Well, Nancy, it's been great to have you on the show with us here at the Leak Project. I certainly wish you the very best, and hopefully we'll have the opportunity to speak to you again sometime.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity. It was really nice. Thanks.
You're very welcome. And once again, folks, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/clandestine Time Lord, our website, leakproject.com. Stay safe and be the change you want to see. This is Rex Bear. Good night.